Hi, everyone. Today I'm joined by Layman Pascal and Schuyler Brown to discuss some exciting developments in our kind of expectations and thoughts around the next Metamodern Spirituality Lab, which, yeah, we thought we'd, discuss a little bit and get into some of the orienting framework and theme of that upcoming event and give people a little touch, taste, smell of what's to come, some sensory preview in any event. And so, anyway, yeah, that's basically what we'll be doing. But this will be a very open, sort of exploratory session, and I'm interested to hear what folks are thinking about what this event might look like and what we might touch on. So, why don't we start with Layman, if you wanted to set this up a little bit and just give me a couple of your thoughts on what you're thinking here.
Sure. Usually our tendency is to mm, let the field of emergent interactions of each of these events sort of tell us what might be a good theme for the next event. And the sense that we got in the last one, which was God themed, is that the goddess is a very natural extension, a very good next step in that process. Then the question becomes, what do we mean by that? Partly we have to answer that question, and partly we don't have to answer that question because the purpose of the event will be like an interpersonal search engine. We'll be collectively trying to figure out what we mean by that. What I've come to in thinking about it is that what makes the goddess as a theme different than God as a theme is a particular set of qualities that we classically associate with feminine aspects of reality. And I'm thinking of things like cyclic patterns. I'm thinking of things like fertility. I'm thinking of embodiment. I'm thinking of ecology. I'm thinking of relationship, things like that that are part of the overall reality, but don't often get presenced or foregrounded in a conversation about God, which very often goes to the notion of the supreme signifier and the ultimate good and the unthinkable and things like that. So I want us to come together in some sort of enacted metamodern level group inquiry to see what sorts of um, ideas, narratives, practices, and conclusions this emergent field of spiritual culture um, finds useful around the goddess as a theme and the energies of the goddess and imaginal and embodied enactments thereof. So we've got Schuyler here to be an additional voice and set of inputs, and I'd be very curious to hear how she thinks about the goddess in general, and then maybe some of her intimations about what could be useful
Hmm.
practices or useful ways of approaching this.
Hmm. Well, thank you for having me. I feel, I'm just meeting you, Brendan, and I didn't really think about it in advance, which might be perfect. Um, so how I think about the goddess, I'm thinking about the goddess all the time, and like when I'm walking, as I'm looking out the window at the green, at the beautiful sky, she's very present for me in nature and in lived experience and in all the like I love those qualities that you just named, Layman, like the relationality, the enactment, the embodiment, fertility, like um just being in a female body in this incarnation, like I like there's no way to not be thinking about the goddess all the time. If you're holding a sacred worldview, which I am. So yeah, I think about her as like I just went to lunch with my daughter, and my daughter at one point we were walking up the street and she put her arm around me, and she's 13. So this is like I was like, oh, like don't move too much, like don't act like it's a big deal. But like, raising a daughter is like I'm calling on the goddess a lot. And so yeah, I think a big part of my experience has been like the retrieval of and the remembrance of the qualities of the feminine, the aspects of the feminine, all of the variations of the goddess. Like I think that would be a beautiful thing to get into. it depends on which goddess you're referencing. Like, who are we in communication with? And there's like 1,000 names for the goddess in the Indian tradition, and each name is a different aspect of her form and her energies in the world. So it's like, by definition, almost impossible to pin down what you mean when you start to speak about the goddess. And her language is like really more visual, more metaphorical, less about the alphabet, so harder to talk about. And I think the last thing I'll say is that, like, the way I really think about the goddess is through prayer and ritual. And I do a lot of ritual. It's a big part of my practice. And maybe you've seen some of the mandalas that I make. I make them like almost every day. It's almost like a compulsion, a positive compulsion. But I'm offering and relating with the goddess when I'm making that art, earth art. So yeah, I'll leave it there and we can riff.
Yeah, I really like some of those qualities you're bringing up. I think there's something liquid and plural about the goddess in terms of not being trapped in any form. And it's not just to me that there's a myriad of goddesses, but so many of them, particularly in the East, are portrayed as many-armed or many-headed or many-breasted, or sort of these vast pluralistic structures. The the importance of being less focused on the alphabetic and the linear and the left brain, I think, is really important. I don't know, Brennan, if you've read Schleyn's Alphabet versus the Goddess. It's one of the early arguments about how right brain and left brain plays out in cultural history. And I think one of the themes that we want to surface really prominently at this event would be how we hold sort of McGilchrist and the new arguments around the right brain and the alternative nonlinear sense-making styles, of which maybe the mandala is an excellent example or bridge between those two sense-making modalities. But I'd be curious what you think about when you think of the goddess, Brendan.
Oh, interesting. Well, I have a lot of thoughts, and I guess some thoughts initially as sort of orienting thoughts, so sort of questions. So these thoughts would be posed as questions, I suppose, to kind of home in on, on what we're talking about, what we're thinking about, what we're feeling into, I suppose. So, well, I'll say up front, I guess, that for me, goddess imagery became very important as I moved away from more kind of traditional religious frameworks, which have much more of that kind of patriarchal God figure to them. And so in my own writing, especially in the God poem that I wrote, there is a very kind of emphatic transition that occurs from sort of the god masculine to the sort of goddess feminine, and all the kind of archetypal imagery that comes along with that. And a lot of that has been stuff that's already been touched upon. A lot of the earth imagery, the fecundity and vitality, and the kind of image of Gaia and all that. And so there's obviously a very rich set of archetypes and images, symbols, kind of evocative aspects of the divine feminine that I think it's essential to be foregrounded, particularly in sort of a contrastive, refocusing or reclamation, that sort of offers a really essential counterpoint to what has tended to be emphasized in religious traditions, which is more of that masculine energy. And so I think that there's something kind of dualistic that kind of comes in there that does a certain role that's valuable. But I think it's that dualism that I also then start to want to question and want to unpack a little bit as well. And I guess maybe one way of kind of foregrounding that set of questions is like, especially these days, there's so much kind of deconstruction of gender going on in culture, and sort of rethinking, reimagining, what does this term mean? A lot of moves into the non-binary, a lot of moves into breaking apart old stereotypes around, gendered associations, right? And so one of the tensions there that I find could be very productive, but also challenging, is how we move into that, simultaneously trying to maintain the very rich set of images and archetypes that have existed and are deeply important and valuable for folks, but also while bringing in the questions about those, maybe trying to undermine them in interesting ways. And so, admittedly, when we did the God theme last time, that to me already was coming to my mind in a very non-gendered sort of way, right? There's sort of capital G God and lowercase g God, and I think that those tend to often be conflated also in contemporary or just popular consciousness. That God is sort of a god, and then being a god is therefore not a goddess, and so you get all that kind of masculine imagery, but also and just in the sense of hotheos and just different conceptions of God as sort of that archetype of the transcendent, that sort of is transgendered, trans categorically, non-binary in all of that sense anyway. So to then come to a very explicitly gendered form of the transcendent is an interesting move that I think is, again, important, but I always evokes this kind of then tension in me of like, well, what do we do with these archetypes? Some might even say stereotypes, and to what degree do we sort of reaffirm them or reify them? To what degree do we want to subvert them? And how do we then do justice to the lived experiences of folks for whom these are really valuable and potent sets of images? And how do we also do justice to the folks who gain a lot of meaning from precisely in the kind of subversion of these very essentialist kind of categories? So all that's kind of floating around in my mind, and there's a lot there, but yeah, that's just a rough stab at that.
Yeah, I love the emphasis on iconography in your thinking, Brendan. I think that'll be a big part of this, and it also goes to the language versus the goddess question. One of Schleyn's points was like, let's have a look at that moment of history where the book people went around and attacked the image people and sort of denounced them as heretical. And what do we need to preserve and bring back and challenge around that move? I think there is a lot of possibility for intellectual discussion around like the non-binary versus the cosmic binary. And, when we're thinking of God, what's the masculine aspect of that and what's the non-masculine or non-gendered aspect of divinity? When we were doing the God one, I was not thinking of it as masculine. I was thinking of it as that which goes beyond categories.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
it's noteworthy that there's a whole set of flavors and qualities that tends not to come up in that discussion that hopefully will be evoked by the goddess discussion.
Wow, I'm just sitting here feeling like the tension that you've named, Brendan, is like the tension that I walk with and work with all the time. Because I also I don't want to be trapped in the in the female bodiedness, or in the duality. But there's I think that's why I use the word retrieval. I think there's still a process of getting to know before we can dissolve the duality altogether. It has to be differentiated, it has to be distinct. And there's so much about the feminine that has been ignored or ignored or actively suppressed in our culture for so long, that I think a lot of people, and I won't even say women, but people are actively curious and trying, like me, to remember, to embody what it means to be in to have the feminine active and awake and accessible, whatever your identification, your gender identification. That's really, really important before we move into a binary kind of conversation. Or maybe they happen simultaneously, but I agree that there is a tension there. Yeah, and I feel that all the time when I'm for example, hosting events, there are events that I host that are for women or female identifying people. And for a long time, I had a lot of tension around that. I was like, well, why are the men excluded? Or why am I not, why is the invite night not for them? But it's kind of undeniable that there's something special that takes place. There's something very important in men's groups, this work of coming into these energetics, leaning into the iconography and knowing the goddess in all her forms. And the crone, there are all these, or the fierce feminine, like Kali, there are all these beautiful goddesses that have so much to teach us, before we jump into, I think we got to kind of like pull them back into, into the conversation before we can move through them.
Yes, definitely. And I also, by kind of foregrounding that particular tension, I think there's also, I mean, tensions upon tensions, fraughtness upon fraughtness, but there's always, also like the danger of the erasure of the feminine in this sort of almost spiritual bypassing way to get to the non-binary or something. And then there's all these like potential conflations too, by like the idea of non-duality and non-binariness. These are both terms, that can be maybe applied to both the gender spectrum, but also like the spiritual spectrum, and maybe mean something very different. So like conflating them can be confusing. It might be productive. But yeah, I think that that there's a lot to that. I mean, I guess for me, maybe another way of thinking about it is that like there are certain aspects of the kind of let's just say quintessentially masculine and feminine that then we can appreciate for the kind of sacred aspects that might, adhere in those particular qualities or modes. But then that seems like a slightly different way into it versus like the divine masculine and the divine feminine, if that makes sense. And maybe I'm really splitting hairs here, but I guess I just mean that like there's one way that kind of presumes a certain kind of anthropocentric quality to the divine, whereas the other way kind of just owns the anthropocentric nature of being a human being and then seeing what is divine in that. And I feel like that's a slightly more comfortable move for me to make. And maybe again, it is just sort of it's a slight difference, but there's something in approaching the divine and then overlaying on that certain kinds of very specific human and cultural kind of terms and framings that that can be obviously helpful, but it can also be dangerous. And so anyway, that's just some of the stuff I feel like is, that the topic evokes. And the last thing I guess I'll say for now is that, well, I guess briefly that this is evoked also whenever, if anyone wanted to talk about the divine masculine, I think the exact same issues would come up. And so, and so trying to give those modalities their due reverence, I guess, quite literally, while also exploring the edges of all that, I think is maybe sort of the mode that seems worth leaning into or something. So, yeah.
What comes up for me is sort of two, they're almost opposite, but they're the same in some ways, methods of handling that, where like part of me thinks of anthropological metaphors as kind of the yang approach and ecological metaphors as the yin approach. But when I zero in on anthropological metaphors and I think of us using human styles and human forms as images for the divine, it seems to me that the presence of the relationship between the genders is kind of the yin way to do that. And the yang way to do it is to assert a singularity or a non-gendered or homogeneous approach to all of this. So, in one sense, I think the anthropological is the masculine in a way, but in another sense, I think it's the internal diversity and complementarity of the anthropological which shows us something about the feminine modality.
Yeah, I think I'm also sitting here feeling like we are in a, at least as long as we're embodied, we're in a a dualistic experience. And this, like, the relationship between men and women, between the genders historically has been like it feels like there's an important path to awakening and to like a culture shift that happens in, as we're having these conversations, like as we're working with the tension, as we're like bringing the complexity of this into our lived and shared experience. And I'm probably like right now embodying that yin. Like I'm sitting here feeling like my way through the yin aspect of the conversation or the argument or approach. One thing I'll add is that this image or this quote keeps coming to mind. It's from Padmasambhava, the Tibetan yogi, and he said many things, but one of them about his consort, Yeshe Sogyal. He said, "If I'm the sun, she is the rays." And it like that, like it's like a touchstone for me, because it felt so true in my experience of the masculine and feminine in my, or positive and negative, or yin and yang in my experience, my lived experience is like, without the rays, like how would we touch the sun? Like how would the sun reach us? Um it's so beautiful actually, because the sun is so magnificent in its brilliance, but the rays are so caressing and so warm and so life-giving, and they're nothing without the other, so um yeah, I like that there.
Yeah, well, there's two thoughts there. I would say two quick thoughts, but they're probably not going to be very quick, but I'll try to make them quick. One is that I think if when we talk about the masculine and the feminine here, to kind of, on the one hand, obviously these are in a sense kinds of abstractions based on our experience as gendered humans living in cultural contexts that are extracting from many, many instances of our experience, certain kinds of abstractions that then, seem to be these essences or archetypes that then we can refer to. Um, and so in that sense, there is a, yes, these go with men and these go with women aspect to it. But then obviously, once those are abstracted and sort of essentialized in some way, then men can relate to their divine feminine and women to their divine masculine, et cetera, because these are aspects that also adhere in every person. And I think that that's part of the thing that for me really, comes out a lot when exploring these kinds of kind of archetypal divisions, because there's a strong sense it's like, but what does it mean then to be male and identifying with these qualities, or vice versa? And so trying to navigate that in some way, right? That on the one hand, this is a sort of thing that comes out of these divisions, but then is experienced individually, and the kinds of ways that, I don't know, that just kind of makes the picture very interesting to kind of explore these aspects of yourself. And I guess the other aspect to that is that, you know, when you talked about the sun and the rays, my mind always goes to kind of the classic imagery of the sun as the masculine, yes, but then it's the moon, that is sort of archetypally the feminine. And then there's this very rich symbology that comes out of, alchemical materials and all this sort of all these kind of psychological and cultural archetypes and mythology, et cetera, that are very potent and that are a way for people to find a lot of themselves in things and to make meaning from their experiences and lean into some of these things. And so then I guess just the question for me, and that's always sort of a metamodern question, is what do we do with those traditions, right? How do we carry them forward in such a way that we hold them loosely while also seeing the genuine wisdom that's there, but also not overly reifying them, et cetera, et cetera? Which again, I guess just is another set of questions that I'm coming to this whole set, this whole inquiry with, is just questions. Is like, these are all the things that come up for me around this fascinating and important topic. And yeah, I'll leave it there.
Mm. Yeah, that popped up for me as well because there's this ancient alchemical habit of doing sun and moon imagery, and it's important in some ways because it helps us think about the lunar realm of the subconscious and the witchy and all these other elements that often get excluded from fallow logocentric meaning making. At the same time, I'm very versed in the integral approach, in which the articulation is around sort of the center and the periphery, and divinity as like concentrated self-awareness, or divinity as radiance and connection. There's something about the rays metaphor that has the benefit of conveying touch, conveying communication, conveying contact, and sidestepping the, I think, marginalizing description that often goes along with the lunar symbolism, which is the moon lacks its own light, they would often say, right? It's merely reflective. And so I think there's a lot to be gained in the lunar symbolism. I don't want to lose that, but we also want to challenge certain ways that it's traditionally been held. I really liked, Brendan, your what bringing up the fractal element, right? That once you have these things, then they're in everybody and they're in every part of each person, because the one of the things we'll need to face, and presumably there'll be more men than women at this, as there often are, So one of the elements will be, how do they make contact with this? What is the feminine in men? Right. And then that leads to really interesting questions like, how have both men and women oppressed the feminine in men? And like all these sort of like cascading fractal dimensions to this thing. But yeah, we do need to think about how to get the best interaction from different bodied individuals who have to individually appreciate these aspects within themselves rather than just be grouped into a category that stands before them.
Hmm. Yeah, that's well, I'm really looking forward to this because I haven't attended one of your events, so I have nothing to compare it to. And which is funny because that's kind of what I was thinking was like there's a little bit of a blank slate, like to the point you were making, Brendan, about how do we honor the traditional the tradition, but then update it for now and next. And I feel like that is like kind of the gift of, if there's a gift in the suppression, oppression, forgetting, or whatever of the feminine tradition, it's that we can kind of do that more easily in a way without so much baggage. I think a lot of women are on that project, and then the other thing, as you were speaking, Layman, I had a question come up around like there's so much about manifestation, like in the feminine, like actually birthing something and like bringing something through into form, Maya, or like, so, just to talk about it in the abstract and even virtually, like, is there a way to authentically and true to the style of gatherings that you have, is there a way to actually you can't see my abdomen, but I keep like wanting to like birth something, like what will be birthed from this?
Yeah. Yeah, I think our the gatherings we have are usually more feminine than a lot of gatherings. We're in the woods and in the earth and building our mandalas in the fields and
Amazing.
things like that. But we do want to lean into that more with this one, right? We're hoping Brendan's partner will give us a mandalic herbal tour and put us to work with the plants. Our thinking around, so normally we start and close the main weekend. There's this initial week for people that want to help set it up and go deeper, and then this weekend part that opens and closes with a ritual. The ritual last time was a kind of progression through different enacted and artistically expressed phases of how humanity has thought about God, and
Hmm.
then eventually weaving up to the top of this hill. But our two thoughts around making a more goddess attuned version of this would be, first of all, to have it be a circle rather than a linear journey. And second of all, we were thinking about the stations being places for embodied emotional expression. Each of them might be a theme or a mode of feeling that would be undertaken through bodily expression and gesture. But super curious if you have any hints, insights, intimations, anything that you might do with a ritual like that.
Wow, I love that. You remind me of a ritual I did at a women's retreat in 2017, which sounds very similar to what you just described, where we did a deep time walk, and we started at like the caves, um, and then walked through over this gigantic, like this big, beautiful piece of land in Italy, and stopped at different, points of interest on the land and went through, we kind of came up through time with the goddess. But I actually like what you're saying even more, like to do something that's not even linear, like that's still linear. Yeah, I mean, I would have to like think about it. I mean, the other thing that came to mind was like the spontaneity, the aspect of the spontaneous, like spontaneous expression, spontaneous gesture, the wisdom in that. And it's funny. It's like, yeah, I don't know, what's coming is just like what's emphasized, what are we paying attention to, like what's emphasized at each stage of the journey. um I'm not even sure exactly what I mean by that, but what are we paying attention to? Because life itself, I think that's it. It's like, you know, life is the teacher, in the feminine wisdom traditions, let's say, or even like a lot of indigenous traditions. Like, we're not stepping onto a path that's outside of or beside our daily life. Like, the life is the teacher, life is the path. And so so it's just how we pay attention to it and what we're paying attention to that makes the difference. Yes.
Mm. Yeah, I like that. I thought of the phrase, in the beginning was the logos, and I'm like this other approach where in the beginning was the bios.
Hmm.
Mhm. Yeah, I keep thinking, like, this planet that we're on is like conceived of in many traditions, and I feel this myself as a feminine entity, as a feminine bodied being, as a goddess, as a goddess. Um, and what does it mean to be like now? So that moves me, like my heart opens when I say this, and then I know the feminine is present. It's like, what does it mean for us to be living on the body of a goddess? Like, to be actually parts of this embodiment of the goddess, all of us, including the plants and the non-human intelligences, like the biosphere or the Gaia. Just feeling like the recognition, like the reverence. You said the word reverence earlier, and I think that's so, so key, like deep reverence to her that holds us is, I think, something that's been missing. I could cry. Okay, so now the well of emotions is opened up. It's like, but yeah, mother, she's right here. It's like such a so much grace that we get to do this at all, that you get to be in the woods, that we get to be in the woods and make mandalas and talk to the plants and learn together.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that there's that really important kind of shift in perspective of, rather than seeing us sort of living on the planet, we emerged from the planet. We the planet in a very real sense kind of birthed the life that is on it, and in that sense, we're children of Gaia. We spring out. We're all autochthonous, in some way, and I think that appreciating that creates a kind of well, certainly a shared identity for all people, for one thing, which I think has a great impact of, or potential impact of, bringing us together across differences. But there's also something to me about the impact that perspective can have on, of course, how we then treat the bios, the earth, the environment, these sorts of concepts that we impose on our lived environs. And it's sort of, if you have the conception that these are just natural resources, right, that's a very different headspace than somehow relating to the land and the earth as the source of your own genesis, upon which you still are being sustained and being nurtured by, in an enduring way, this mater, this material, this matrix, which is life-giving. And so that whole perspective shift and the necessity of that kind of perspective shift at a kind of global level, to become consciously aware of that, as a kind of crucial leverage point too for shifting our modes of behavior from destructive, extractive, exploitative approaches to being in more symbiotic relationship, which obviously we need. So there's a key praxis, mm, what would you say, a kind of shift in behavior, and in a way that's very globally necessary at the moment, which is not a new point. I know many make it, and it does fit into many of the paradigms that have already been discussed in terms of shifting from left brain to right brain and these sorts of things. But that kind of destructive, exploitative approach is not going to serve us. And when you frame that in sacred terms and spiritual terms, it takes on a kind of urgency and an embodied and emotional connection that is very different than if, an environmentalist movement comes to you and they say, here are these facts and figures about, the deforestation or something like that, right? There's a whole different set of relationships that get evoked in that kind of archetypal framing of the issue that I think are essential, maybe. It's just a way of thinking about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that brings up several things for me. One is, um, yeah, how do we sidestep or complement the tendency to think of Earth and ecology in a technical framing, in like the Heideggerian sense of technical, right? Bruno Latour has this lecture on the Earth is not a sphere, something like when you think of the globe, it's nice, it's better than a map, it's better than a flat map, but you've already thought of it as an object and you're imagining yourself in some zero position. So to figure out how to arrange these objects in a system, and that's not how we encounter Earth. We encounter it immersed. We encounter it around us as a realm that entangles us into itself. Actually, Wilber's sex ecology spirituality deals with a lot of that, right? The tendency, the maintenance of a kind of nihilistic flatness in a lot of the ecological movements, which treat biology merely as a material realm of facts that we have to manipulate on a resource chessboard. So there's that. I'm also thinking about there's a subset of people in developmental studies who sort of think of the what do they call it? The Guy Anthropocene, that this is the history of these phases of culture is the history of the awakening of the biosphere to itself with the help of a sapient species. And so that's an interesting different spin to put on the story of the emergence of complexification. And it goes along really nicely with I mean, the things I put in the book and trying to pick out the way Gurdjieff thought about reframing spiritual practice as being of service to the biosphere, that those can't be disentangled. And we probably shouldn't be telling each other the story of our psychotechnologies in a way that's apart from our ecology. So that seems to me really important. And there's probably a future for coming up with new kinds of mythically laden narratives that have that characteristic. And the other thing is, Brennan, you said um, like moving from left brain to right brain. And that's an interesting part here too, because we can't just switch from the one to the other. We've got to figure out what their correct relationship is. And I think that's really under theorized. I see it under theorized in McGilchrist of, there have been several prominent men who've said, here's what it looks like from the right brain, and we have to really unfold that. But they haven't also said, where is it legitimate for the left brain to oppose the right brain? Where should the human step in and intervene in the natural? Where does one give, where does the other give, and what sorts of syntheses or hybridizations are possible between them that avoid this question of like shifting from one to the other and just getting the alternative form of imbalance? That was a lot.
Yeah. Well, presuming then that, let's say the questions find a sort of tacit um, answer in embracing a lot of the kind of traditional archetypal framings of the feminine in the ways we've been describing, which I think we'll largely have to do. Otherwise, we'll just only be asking questions the whole time. But like presuming that, it then, demands that we think about how we even do the various things that we're doing in the space of this event, right? We don't just want to have then a lab that is, doing what we would normally do if we were talking about some, logo phallocentric masculine set of ideas and theories and meta theory, but now just, replace that content with the content of the divine feminine. We'd want to live into that with an embodied set of praxis that then brings out a lot more of that spontaneity, a lot more of that kind of embodied emotional wellspring. And so, what set of practices, what way of showing up to the very event or gathering do we need to and I don't want to say reconceptualize, but reimagine, relive, reform, remember in some way, I think is a set of issues that we'll be having to navigate in an important way.
I love that, Brendan. I love that you bring in the questions because traditionally, like there's a lot of traditional texts from the East where the consort, the female is asking questions of the male, like the Radiant Sutra, which is Shiva and Shakti, a dialogue between them. And there's a lot with Padmasambhava and Yoshe Sogyo also, where she's asking questions and he's answering. But the point, like, she's asking the question, she knows the answers to the questions because she's a goddess. So she already is also omniscient. But she's pulling out, like, she's actually directing the flow of the teachings through the questions that she's asking. And so there's something about the art of asking the questions, like I was saying a minute ago, about what we pay attention to. Like, that's one thing I've like in my practice, in my life, like, the noticing of what life is offering, of what, the natural world is offering, and then the asking of questions, pretty regularly. And all of this seems like, really, I love that, like, how does that inform even the way that the event is structured is, like, so exciting, and so beautiful.
Which then also, just real quick, I think, well, no, go ahead, Layman. I didn't want to interrupt.
I'm just trying to bring together the different pieces I've got now in terms of the practicalities of it. Like, I think there's a lot of continuity we want to maintain with the general events that we do. And I'm starting to see, I've been calling it 30-30-30-10 in my mind lately. Like, these things, I sort of ideally, and I think we're pretty close to approximating about 30% embodiment and movement practices, about 30% emotional nourishment and vibing with each other, about 30% intellectual inquiry, and then 10% surprises that come out of the field that we couldn't possibly have planned. We've got the uh, difference in the ritual in terms of the circularity and the emotional orientation. I think this thing that Schuyler just brought up could really be instantiated in terms of having women be questioners in the space. That could be really interesting. I think there's a lot we can't see in advance that the individual people will bring in and that we get out of holding the intention together. Also, I just came back from this anomalous entities thing on the West Coast, and we had Sean Hargens lead us through what they call a CE5, which is like a group alien invocation, which sounds preposterous, but gets surprisingly interesting results. And I thought we could do something like that as well, maybe one of the evenings, because there's another sense of the goddess as the heavens, as the like other to the human species, and as the principle of a contact for which we long with something that's mysterious to us and as futuristic as it is archaic. So that could be a part of it. Oh, I spoke to Adriana last week, and she was really concerned to have something in the space around wildness, around people having permission to not know what they're doing, which she really associates with some of the feminine themes.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I was actually, I think, gonna say, on your 30-30-30-10, I was like, 10 for the unexpected. I feel like it's like got to be one of the 30s for this event. And so maybe I'm in agreement with Adriana around that wildness and that, like, not knowing what we're doing or where we're going and seeing what comes through, what emerges. And the other thing that came to me was beauty. It might be obvious, but it gets forgotten so often that, eros, beauty, seduction, admiration, like this aspect of gathering, like someone paying attention to just the atmosphere of the space. And I'm sure you do, but that's just like, if you're going to invoke the goddess, you want to give her a beautiful space to land. Like, that's kind of like baseline. She's like, you want me to come there? I don't know. Yeah, and on the cosmic layman, I feel like maybe this is a session, but yeah, like I'm also holding this masculine, feminine, this idea of a union that is between the feminine earth and the cosmic masculine. So I know this cosmic feminine that you're talking about can look like Mother Nut, from the Egyptian, or just the cosmic mother. But there's also this this union, this meeting of like if Earth is a feminine entity, where is her masculine consort? Where's her consort? And so that cosmic masculine is also like what happens with that combustion is like really exciting too. Could be intergalactic.
Mm. Yeah, Mother Earth, Father Sky, very classic. And yeah, don't worry, we will structure in a lot of wildness to this event. So um I was gonna suggest that, Layman, you've always done a great job trying to foreground the elders in the space. And so it would be really special to draw on sort of the matriarchs, whatever that looks like, if there's people who could speak from kind of that perspective, maybe. Obviously a lot of this will be dependent on who shows up and all that sort of a thing. But I feel like having the wisdom of sort of, in the sense the lived divine feminine and the kind of just the wisdom of well, and Sophia, we actually haven't even talked about that aspect of this too, but we'll leave that aside for now. But anyway, yeah, the perspective of the matriarch and what can be offered as wisdom into the space, of great need and great urgency potentially as well, but also just to honor those voices and that lived experience.
Mm.
Hmm. Also, if you're there, Sky, I mean, one of the reasons we're calling it a lab now and not a retreat is we're encouraging everybody who's there to potentially lead sessions, do things, to have it be an experimental lab-like space. Because there's so much. I mean, obviously you have a lot to offer, but there's so many people here who have a lot to offer, and they don't always get the chance or the extra request to bring something forward that's maybe at their leading edge in a space like this. I
Mhm.
know you do a lot of these sorts of things, but whatever you come up with, we're very open to having sessions or practices that you might want to lead if you're there.
Mm. Sounds amazing. Yeah, I love that. I love an atmosphere like that too. And I mean, I'm finding that so much with these women's Sacred Heart groups that I've been leading. It's like you get a bunch, and I know that the gathering is not all women, but just to say like what I'm experiencing with women who are in a space that's well held, that feels safe, that feels encouraging, is this like incredible blossoming of gifts. Like the uniqueness of each individual is just, and then the gifts that come spontaneously for them to offer, it's like so enriching. Um, so yeah, just like I'm craving, and I know so many people are craving those kinds of gatherings and those kinds of experiences, and especially multi-day, where you can sleep on things and then you're eating meals together. It's just like, yeah, so nourishing. Thank you. Sounds fun.
Yeah, you know, I'm not going to be there, but it sounds great. I wish you all the best. No, I'm just kidding. No, I'm really looking forward to this. I think we've covered a good amount of ground. Is there anything else that you feel like we want to throw into this cauldron and stir it a little bit? Any other any other aspects or actions, practices? It's sort of a nice it's a neologism, which I very intentionally just coined. Yeah, anything else to throw into this while we're marinating on these different aspects?
I'm good. I feel buzzy. I feel twice as excited as when I started this conversation. Made a lot of great notes about some of the practical ideas, some of the themes, but also some of my favorite words that you both used that I think need to be in play. When do you imagine sort of public announcement and reach out might begin, Brendan?
Well, imminently, I suppose. I mean, it's really not as far away as we think. This will be happening in September, sort of mid-September-ish, right? The 13th. And so I think we're really only, what, 2 months away. So basically now.
Okay.
This was really helpful to start, getting the brainstorming, creative juices going and all that. And I think it would be great to start putting out some information about this. I'll try to do my usual thing of maybe making some kind of video that features some of the more autumnal images. And also to the beauty point, Schuyler, especially. Yeah, I mean, that is such a huge thing. And I think that Sky Meadow as a container for this, I think has that box checked pretty well in terms of leaning into especially the natural beauty. Anyway, there's a lot to really appreciate about that.
Skylar,
So
when you said beauty, I imagine, because we often have open windows and doors there, I imagine like curtains everywhere blowing in the
Yeah.
wind.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, you don't have to redecorate, but you know what I mean? Like some attention to some throw pillows, you know. That's
well,
what the goddess really likes, throw
yeah,
pillows.
right. Um, yeah, any maybe in the pre-retreat portion, we can get some decorative inputs on what would make the goddess feel most comfortable
Like that
to
we're
arrive.
ending on that. It's funny.
But yeah, I feel pretty good. Anything, Skylar, you'd like to add?
No, it's just funny. I'm looking around, like I just turned my head and I'm like, I got all these goddesses like surrounding me. Durga's here and some dakinis. Like, um,
That could be a
no,
thing.
she,
But like we could ask some folks to bring some materials, I think,
oh
to really kind
yeah.
of lean into that. I mean, actually, that is one thing that I kept thinking about, especially is, all the rich, gosh, like iconographic, the little statuettes, the Venus sculptures, this vast history of relating to the goddess in kind of pictorial or kind of material culture form. But there's such so all that I don't know. So part of the idea is just sort of like maybe we invite people if they wish to bring some aspect of that into the space, whatever they'd like to.
I think that's beautiful. I think that's really important. It's like I mean, so many people, but also I know a lot of women have these incredibly beautiful altars, that
Mm,
contain like natural objects. You've got your stone, things that you're finding, feathers, etc. And then like for the whole community to be building a shared,
mm.
like a communal altar, like really, really beautiful. And there's something so, y'all, I feel like y'all are more expert on this than me, but just like when you were saying, Layman, about like the images of the goddess with the many arms or the many breasts or whatever, like it's just so primal, right? Like the baby sees a breast, like it's like there is a reason for the iconography when you're talking about the feminine, it's not abstracted. Like we actually want to see her shape, her form, and yeah, and I love those little Venus figurines too. Yeah, so cool.
Great. I'll order a bulk order off Amazon and I'll get those delivered. And no, um,
You can these days,
you
I'm sure.
probably can. Yeah. I love the
Oh,
idea of building a collective altar, though, specifically maybe yeah, the divine feminine. And especially in ways that for me it's very special because we're having these events here over time that things can accrete and build off of previous happenings and work that gets done. I love the idea of things having a permanence here that can continue to be added to and grow and become sort of just get that patina over time. So maybe a kind of permanent installation to the divine feminine that could be a continual
yes.
place to yeah.
I think something just came up just related to the elders. Like I love that. Just that because that is such an important, like the cycles, like the maiden mother crone, like the triple goddess. There's such like I think just like the importance of making space for each of those ages
Mm.
of the feminine, and that could be like a cool structure also, like I don't know if it's part of the whatever the opening is, or if it's like a part of a day, or like an invitation to the maiden, or a dialogue between, or some kind of ritual between the elders and the young women or whatever, like that's it's not just a convenient way to classify. It's actually very, very significant because of the blood rights. Like there's a real transition that happens in the body psyche of
Mm.
the woman through those different phases. Yeah.
Hmm. Okay, terrific.
Wonderful.
Good work, team.
Yeah. Well, thank you all so much. And,
Thank you.
for those who tuned in, stay tuned for more information about the event. And we'll be posting some stuff around that. And if you're interested in this, by all means, by the time this is, actually, no, you can already do this, actually, is sign up for this event. It's on, if you go to skymeadowinstitute.org, just you'll find all that you need there, and you can register. So hopefully this seems compelling, and we'd love you to be there. So thank you, Schuyler and Layman. Much appreciated.